Hello, Erin Reed. I'm so glad to have you here, and I do apologize for my technical difficulties.
It's okay. Hi. Thanks for having me on.
It is a pleasure to have you here. I know that Tom was able to actually contact you and get you here. I'm just so honored that you're here. There's so much to talk about. But you want to tell folks a little bit about yourself and what the mission is?
Of course, yeah. So I am an activist, a content creator, and a queer legislative researcher. I do a number of digital forms of activism and organizing. So I track legislation that affects the LGBTQ community around the country, as well as I created the largest transgender informed consent hormone therapy resource, which allows you to find the nearest informed consent hormone therapy clinic near you. It's been accessed over 3 million times. I care a lot about the community that I belong to and about the decisions that are being made around the country that affect people like me.
And how did this start for you? Where did this begin?
Of course. So in 2019, a bit over 3 years ago, nearly 4 now, I transitioned early in the year and found that it was very hard to access healthcare resources. In particular, there was no centralized place that could tell you where to go if you wanted to go ahead and medically transition genders. And so given that it was so difficult for me, I found that the information was out there all over the internet, but it was not consolidated in one place and in an easy to find format. And so the community had helped me a lot at the time. And so I wanted to give back to the community by doing what I know how to do best, which is use the internet to do things. I've been on online activism for quite a long time. And so I consolidated all of these healthcare resources together and released them all in one batch to the public. And ever since then, people just started getting in touch with me, networking with me. That's how I started getting involved in activism. That's how I started getting involved in the legislation that's being pushed around the country. Once I had a following, I pivoted a bit to focus on laws that were being proposed, especially in 2020 and 2021. And ever since then, I've just become very ingrained and networked into the community. And I try to help out as many people as I can through information and networking.
And I mean, I'd love to hear what some of those things are that happened in 2021. I mean, I know about it, but our listeners may not. But if it's okay, can you just talk a little bit about yourself and your own journey? And when did you start knowing that you wanted to transition?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, everybody's journey is different. Everybody's transition is different. Everybody's way that they become comfortable with who they are is different. For myself, I was a very young kid. I was, I think, 8 years old whenever I had first expressed ideas or thoughts around transitioning genders before there were words for it. For me, I come from a very rural red state, Louisiana, born and raised deep in the swamps and poverty. And so this was not something that I had immediate access to, be it knowledge or information, but I did know what I wanted and I knew myself. I think it wasn't until 12 years old, 13 years old that I was given access to the internet, which was a wonderful thing for me as a kid. This was in around the year 2000-ish, whenever I had first discovered through searches online that being trans was a thing, that you could transition genders. For 4 or 5 years, I used my name, the name that I currently use, Erin, online, and eventually decided that would be a difficult journey for me, especially living where I did. And so I just kind of kept it quiet for a very long time until my adult life. And then 2019 happened. And I suppose that 2019 brought a lot of changes for a lot of people. 2020 with the COVID pandemic, I had transitioned a little bit before then, just through speaking to a therapist and letting my feelings out, moving to a new state, moving from Louisiana to Maryland. So it was quite a journey for me, but I'm very happy that I took it. My life is so self-actualized right now, and it's in a good place. And that's why I take the beauty and confidence and this self-actualization that I've achieved, and I try to use that to help other people get to that same point.
It's such an important message as well. Can I ask another sort of personal question? Why was it, and why do you think it is so difficult in our country for for people to be who they want to be.
I've got a lot of feelings about this, a lot of thoughts about this. I think that in our country, in the United States, there exists a system of hierarchies that have been ingrained within our culture around masculinity, around what femininity means, around your value as a person, as a worker, as everything that we are told and programmed, I feel can kind of keep us from deviating from that path. And I do think that there are forces like electoralism, where, you know, people that are different are often immediately targeted as and othered, and therefore used for a quick advantage, be it in a voting election or be it in a classroom setting with some bullies. So I feel like, you know, people sometimes don't get what they don't understand. And now with visibility, increasing visibility in the United States of people like me and of transgender people and queer people and LGBTQ people, we are seeing people more free to be themselves, which is a beautiful thing, but we're also seeing backlash. And a lot of people are having to deal with that for the first time in their lives for some people.
It's unnerving seeing how confident and just comfortable being out with it some people are, just being outright bigoted. So there's that other Joe podcast. So there's another podcast hosted by a Joe that had on this guy named Matt Walsh, who has been mentioned on the show before, who is a propagandist, a self-described theocratic fascist, a white supremacist. And he went on to the most listened to podcast on the planet and was uncontested except on one point because it was so absurd.
What point was that?
That there are, quote, millions of kids undergoing hormone therapy in this country, which on its own, first off, HRT is one of the most unjustifiably misunderstood things that I think are talked about today. First off, Joe Rogan does HRT. He has done more HRT than most people alive.
And just for our audience, HRT, the acronym is
hormone replacement therapy.
Got it.
So if you inject exogenous testosterone, that's HRT. That's gender affirming care. If you do a hair transplant, that's gender affirming care. But if it's something I think is icky, then it's a threat to society.
You're entirely correct. And so I'm going to jump in here because this is something that you raised a really good point. So for one, yes. So Matt Walsh did go into the Joe Rogan show and had mentioned that whenever discussing what transition entails for LGBTQ youth, had mentioned that millions of kids are on HRT. He was live fact checked on the show, which was quite surprising given the Joe Rogan show. However, he was live fact checked on the show, and they determined that the actual number of transgender youth on HRT was something like 4,700. This was from a recent study that had come out. And so it's actually, a lot of people don't really realize how exceedingly rare trans youth medical transition actually is. A lot of times the resources aren't there. You have to live next to a clinic. You have to have parental consent. You have to have often very heavy psychological care. Most families that I speak to have a year or two worth of therapy before anything is even considered. And so, yeah, the numbers are actually quite low. And it's amazing how much certain forces in our country have demonized this group of people, given that it's such a low number of people in our society. And yet it has taken up such an outstanding, like overly emphasized portion of the public discourse lately.
Yeah. We will definitely come back to this discourse, but right now I do need to give an opportunity for our sponsors to have their discourse. So with that in mind, we'll take a commercial break, but we'll be right back with Erin Reed and the Dr. Joe Show.
Welcome back to the Dr. Joe Show, here with Erin Reed, talking about all the supposed millions of children on HRT who are also taking over high school sports. So Erin, my wife's friend is a swimming referee or something, and girls swimming, and a few of the girls are transgender, and then they beat all the other girls by 1,000. It's a totally true story. I didn't just make that up.
Of course, this is happening all over the United States. All of
All
these,
over.
every school that I've heard of, a school a couple towns away. It's always a couple towns away, by the way.
Yep.
You know, it's really funny that you mentioned this, because in the state of Utah, there was a law that was passed really recently that was that essentially would take any person accused of being transgender in sports and put them in front of a panel of experts who would judge their gender. The state of Utah had reportedly only had a single transgender girl competitor in the entire state. And so whenever they did this law, the law was allowed to go into effect. And then there was a particular student who, actually it was 3 students who were accused of being trans. All 3 of them turned out to be cisgender. The courts overturned it immediately after that. Funny how it works that way. This is what people warned about, though, because in actuality, laws that generally tend to target transgender people more often also affect and target cisgender people that are gender nonconforming. And you see this happen all the time. You see this in bathrooms. Really recently, for instance, there was a case on TikTok where a cisgender female, meaning a female that was born assigned female at birth, was accused of being a transgender woman because they simply did not have an appearance that matched what you might expect a cisgender woman would look like. So yes, we see this all the time. This is something that occurs.
And I mean, it's gotten so out of hand. My other wife's friends who owns a school has litter boxes in the classrooms for people who identify as cats. That's not made up.
Litter boxes everywhere. And in fact, the person that you mentioned earlier, Joe Rogan, was the originator, or one of the originators of this rumor. It was actually originally, I think, on Libs of TikTok, but you know,
yeah,
neither here nor there.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that one just for a bit, because it's so much darker than that. So Dr. Joe and listeners, you'll hear this like, oh, it's gotten so out of hand style story where that mentions litter boxes in classrooms for students who identify as cats. If that sounds ridiculous and stupid, it's because it's ridiculous and stupid. And editorializing here, this is not the opinion of the Dr. Joe Show. If you believe that, maybe you're ridiculous and stupid.
Tom, yeah, I'm not sure how people are feline about that.
Yeah. So
sorry.
So there was kitty litter in this school, Stockton classrooms, as part of their protocols on school shooters. So each classroom has a bucket, a tent, and a bag of kitty litter for kids that need to use the bathroom.
So it is really fascinating. Why do you think some people actually believe this stuff? Erin, what do you think?
I think that people, this has happened before, you know, like this has happened before, not just with trans people. This goes back and back and back. I mean, whenever you have a minority that you don't understand, one of the easiest things to do to get a quick laugh, to get a anger response from people, to spread fear, is to start accusing them of outlandish things. I mean, we've seen virtually every minority in the book has had this kind of treatment before. And with transgender people, it's kitty litter that gets spread on a massive Twitter account that then gets repeated in state legislatures. There was a news article of how like 18 different state legislatures repeated this rumor as if it was fact. I watched the Missouri legislature debate whether or not transgender kids should have access to healthcare. And this came up as fact in that legislative hearing. And so, you know, I guess it's easy to, like, if you already are scared of a group and you're already demonizing your group for electoral gain, you try to come up with something that's going to really make that impact. I will say this though, there was really recently, mid-October, I stopped in a small rural town in a McDonald's, and I got down and I heard inside, I overheard some people mention, like, talking to their kids, and I heard the word transgender, and I'm like, oh God, I'm in like a small rural town. I've got my rainbow earrings on. Do I need to take them off? I'm kind of scared. But then I overheard a little bit more, and they were literally talking about how like it's a BS conspiracy theory, how the kitty litter was a BS conspiracy theory. So they identified it. They knew that it was, and they were like, yeah, this isn't right. And how like trans people just want equality. And that really like, it was a big moment for me because I come from a small town, a small red rural town. And like, I was scared in that circumstance because of the interactions that I have had in the past, you know, growing up in Louisiana and growing up in a rural town. But then hearing that like, even these random people were talking about it and like talking about it and interrogating it, like, I don't know. I think something inside me just says that like people do maybe hopefully see through this stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like there was some hope in that. The other important word was demonizing, because human beings, I think, we really are social animals, and we rely on other human beings. So I truly believe that one of the only ways that we can hurt somebody else is to dehumanize them. And that's what demonizing is. These aren't really human anymore. So it's okay for us to hurt them. What do you think of that hypothesis, Erin?
I think that that's a very astute observation. And, you know, I have been tracking this kind of language for a while now because it can lead to further issues and to further violence even. And one of the steps that you need to watch out for in the targeting of a minority group is the dehumanization language. A lot of times, for instance, and I've watched hundreds of hours of legislative hearings. I've seen transgender people compared to rodents. I've seen transgender people compared to viruses. There was a particular person in Missouri who, in a legislative hearing, essentially compared transgender people to a virus infecting our schools. And so, yeah, dehumanization is essential if your end goal is to eliminate a population. And there are, make no doubt about it, there are groups of people that want to eliminate transgender people, that want transgender people to not exist, that want, if we do exist, for us to be in hiding like things used to be, like they were 40, 50 years ago. And so dehumanization is absolutely something that is going on. And it's an astute observation to point that out.
Is that actually a positive, hopeful thing about us as humans? That the only way we really can hurt someone else is to dehumanize them.
I see what you're getting at there. And you know, yeah, I think I personally, so like people will, I tell people that I'm an optimist a lot, and I am an optimist. I always have been. People ask me how I can keep fighting even in the face of like all the stuff that we're facing right now. And it is because I'm optimistic. I do think that there are pathways to acceptance, social acceptance, to, you know, beauty, and to people finding fellowship with one another. So yeah, I do think that that is the only way to truly get one over on a group of people, is to dehumanize them and to lower their value as human beings to you. But make no doubt about it, we have that, like people are doing that. And
Yes.
I hope that people recognize that it's not a good thing to do, you know?
Yeah, I hope so too. And I share your optimism. I really do. I have a lot of faith in who we are as human beings, but everybody wants the same thing. We just want to feel valued by somebody else. Think about every person you've ever met. The problem is we have spent millennia increasing our value by decreasing somebody else's. And then we're astonished that the other person does the same. But at any and every moment, you can remind someone of their value.
Stretch the kindness, brush with